The first principle of object-oriented programming that I'm going to discuss within this course is actually something you've already really learned, just not within the context of object-oriented programming. So the first thing I'd like to talk to you about very briefly is the concept of abstraction. Now, abstraction is really just being able to model some real-world objects or things or functionality into our application so that we can use that particular functionality within our application similarly to how we would actually use that thing out in the real world. So the way that we've learned to do this so far is through the use of classes or structures or even enumerations should you choose to use them that way. So an example of this might be if we have an application that has to do something with a car, maybe tracking mileage or doing something along those lines, we could create an abstract data type that could model a car in the real world. So we could do that by creating a class, and we could call it car, and we would start to define a series of properties and methods that could describe that particular object, or in this case, a car. So I could create a property named number of wheels, and we'll say that that's an integer, and we'll say that by default that's going to be 4, and then we could create a number of doors, and that would be an integer as well, and we could start that off as being 4, and then we could create methods on car that would describe some actions that the car could actually take. So we could create a function here that would say maybe drive with no inputs and no outputs, and this obviously did some sort of functionality, and maybe we would have something that would maybe start the car and things of that nature. So we could continue to model this car class after the real world object or real world concepts that are associated with a car. And then throughout our application, we could use this car very similarly to how we would use a car in the real world, with the exception of obviously getting in it and driving it, but we would be able to represent it with this abstract data type known as a car class. So that's the basic fundamental idea behind abstraction. So a lot of times you don't hear people talk about that one simply because it's kind of a given. If you are using object-oriented programming, you're going to have the concept of a class in that language, and that in and of itself is pretty much abstraction. So now that we have the basic idea about what abstraction is, let's go ahead and dig into the 3 other more popular ideas around object-oriented programming.